Welcome to the Nuclear Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Nowicki, a former electrician's mate on the USS Minneapolis-St. Paul turned nuclear industry veteran with over 40 years of experience. From the U.S. to plants worldwide, I've not only led large engineering organizations, I've helped train nuclear leaders who keep nuclear power safe and strong. Each episode, we dive into the stories, challenges, and strategies of the dedicated people driving this vital industry. Let's spark some leadership excellence together. On this episode, I have Annaliese Piriano. She transitioned to a nuclear plant from academia. And I love the ways that she kind of infused herself into the process of educating new nuclear leaders / operators. And she also talks about NeuroLeadership. I love those principles and how that helps enhance the organizational culture at Vistra. I've got a lot of opportunities to talk to a lot of different people, but for whatever reason, I love the people that have to deal with really sticky problems and are really close to helping folks that operate, maintain, and design nuclear plants. And Annaliese is one of those people. Here she is, Annaliese Piriano. Outside of Pittsburgh, so you a big Steelers fan?
Sure. Yeah, you know what? It's not that I'm just not a sports person.
I'm just messing with you. No, so I got to know you, and I can't remember. Oh, one of the people I met in a leadership course, you have to interview Annaliese. So here you are. And I know you came from outside the industry, but you're well part of the industry now. So how did you get started on your nuclear journey to Beaver Valley?
In my first career, I was an English instructor, high school, and then with ITT Technical Institute. And then I became their associate dean when I finished my master's degree. And then I went on to my PhD and taught at Indiana University of Pennsylvania while I did that, IUP. And while I was finishing my doctoral studies, a friend of mine worked we were First Energy at the time. A friend of mine he worked with the lobbyists. He had a really neat job. And it was a really interesting position. He's retired now. But nonetheless, he said to me, "You really should work for First Energy. It's a great company." And I'm like, what am I going to do in that industry? But I got online, I looked, and I found this position, and it was perfect. And I applied, and here I am 8 years later. Love it. I'm really enjoying. I love what I do.
As I look at you, you don't really match the nuclear workers that I'm used to. Obviously, you care about fashion and all that good stuff. And it's funny, I just thought it popped in my head. I remember when I started at the plant in the early 90s, that even back then, big hair was a big deal. And ladies would come in the plant with their hard hats perched on the back of their head so they wouldn't mess up the poof in the front, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Hey, when I wear my hard hat, I still wear my lipstick. So,
That's good. But to go back to your story, so you show up, and I won't say, I'm curious of what your first impression after you got the job and how you tackled that, maybe some old school thoughts and how you applied what you learned that worked and the method you chose to use.
It was definitely culture shock for me coming out of academia. Of course, it's predominantly men here. That was very different for me. I was very intimidated, for sure. I was pretty young, and it was definitely a big step for me. But it took a lot of time and patience and persistence. There was quite a bit of resistance to a lot of the things I tried early on. I came in with a lot of big ideas and wanted to make some changes, and it was hard. It was an uphill battle for quite a while, but we slowed things down. We worked in increments and small learnings, little doses at different times. And over time, and again, we have a really great group of people, instructors at Beaver Valley and fleet-wide, but my focus has been Beaver Valley for most of my career here. and they've been pretty accepting, and I've built really great relationships over time. Now, after 8 years, they take me seriously, and we've seen some great changes, and it's really been very rewarding.
Yeah. So tell me about, just popped in my head, like acronyms, the technical aspects of things, but what was it that was intimidating to you besides all the guys and all that?
Just my second day here, I went to this meeting, and it was called a vertical review board. And it was a program owner and the instructor and the training supervisor, this whole panel, and they were presenting a topic. And I couldn't believe the amount of feedback, the amount, like the attention to detail, the application of procedures. It just was nothing I was used to at all. And it scared me. I thought, what did I get myself into? But I've adjusted, but the industry's changed a lot in 8 years as well, especially in training. Now we're seeing the shift, a big shift towards the things that I was talking about early on. And we were at Conti, and we're seeing the topics change at conferences, and the industry's really moving in the right direction, I think, as far as what we've been trying to do.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. Somebody might be listening to this and say, yeah, no kidding. Details are important, all that stuff you just mentioned. Why was that? And how did that apply to through how people learn and your neural circuits and all that good stuff?
We started with kind of small changes. The very first thing that popped out at me was like death by PowerPoint in the classroom. And so I thought to myself, okay, how can I help these instructors and supervise? How can I help them make changes? But you got to get buy-in, right? Okay, yeah, because it's not about a song and a dance, and it's not about making a presentation look pretty. Okay, there's real things that happen, and there's real things that are going on in the brain, and things that you can do to encourage the learning and retention. And I knew that. I started to present the research. So we'd do we have weekly meetings with the department, and we would present like little bits of research. For instance, the Challenger disaster, some of that research they attributed back to death by PowerPoint, essentially. And so that was one of the things we talked about, and why that sort of thing doesn't work. Now we know something called dual coding, right? You want to appeal to more than just one part of the brain. So it's not just about reading text on a slide, the instructor reading the text on the slide. You need to show some kind of other representation as well to be more effective and be more likely to be retained. We did those things in small steps. And then from there, that sort of progressed pretty well, and we saw a lot of changes. And then we came across a problem that we were having, and the industry didn't know how to address it, and that was exam anxiety. So we had some students struggling with their licensing exams. And when we talked with them, we knew it had something to do with anxiety, but we didn't know what to do with that. So we put together a program to address exam anxiety. And again, the ways you combat exam anxiety, or any kind of anxiety, right? You have to engage the parasympathetic nervous system to counteract the sympathetic nervous system. You go into fight or flight. And so rather than just talk to people about, okay, breathing techniques and meditation and relaxation techniques, which when you're talking to a nuclear professional, an operator, they're looking at you like, are you kidding me? But there's so much research about the impacts on the brain, and actually how that anxiety, it essentially stops you from being able to access those higher order processes that you need to be able to. So our program walks them through what's happening in their brain when they're in these situations, what's happening, why it's happening, and how you can combat it, how you can address it. And we've had quite a bit of success with students that have come to us for support and then have gone on to be successful. So now we're working on helping more with the performance side of it, and there's a lot of overlap, right? But because we had some operators ask us, okay, I'm struggling with anxiety, but it's not on exams, it's in the simulator or in the control room. So that's something that we have in the works now. We're working on developing that. But I really put a lot of stock in convincing people through the research. And everybody likes to talk about the brain, and it's fascinating. And we know this much about the brain right now. And so, and it's not going away, right? Neuroscience it's not a fad. It's here to stay. It's going to continue to develop. And so we're embracing it and applying it as best we can.
So you talked about PowerPoints and how you just switch things up a little bit. Give a specific example on how PowerPoints and death by PowerPoint and bulleted lists, or how did you switch that up?
So bulleted lists are bad because not always bad. I shouldn't blanket statement that, but bulleted lists. So what happens when you look at a bulleted list, it's a visual, right? So right away the brain goes, oh, this is a list. Because your brain wants to know, you want to know right away, what is that list? What is the meaning of this information on the slide? And how does it all relate to the other information on the slide? So I'm doing that while you're talking. So I'm not listening to you as the instructor, right? And so I'm reading the slide. It's like human nature. I'm trying to figure out, what does this list mean? Now, if it's not actually a list of things, let's say it's actually some kind of taxonomy or it's some kind of pyramid relationship or it's something hierarchical or whatever. I have to take out the fact that, okay, because right away that visual says that this is a list. And I have to say, oh, wait, it's not a list. I have to pull that bit of cognitive noise out of my brain and put in the real information, which is, okay, this is hierarchical. And that happens pretty quickly, but it's all noise. It all gets in the way. It slows the process. And again, I'm not listening to the instructor. So if instead I show that information as it's meant to be viewed in a pyramid form or Venn diagram or whatever it might be, again, as soon as I look at that slide, I know right away, my brain, because we recognize images just instantaneously, I know what okay, here's what this relationship, here's how the information relates. Here's what it means. Now I can focus on the instructor. So it's very powerful when we provide that visual representation right away. I always think of it like a billboard. You're driving down the road. You have a split second to make sense of the billboard. And if it's an effective visual, we get it right away and we can switch our focus. The other thing that's really powerful that people don't realize and don't use is a topic sentence at the very top of the slide. So if you have a statement that says the point of the slide, just one statement, left justified like a sentence, because we read left, so the brain will automatically recognize that as, okay, this is a sentence, something I need to read and take meaning from. And then I can say, oh, okay, here's what this slide means. I see the representation. Now I can listen to you. Okay, and now we're hitting dual coding too, right? So I'm listening to you and I'm seeing a visual representation. So it's dual channels. So that's even more effective. But we don't do that. So we use these because PowerPoint, the template that they give you it's a bulleted list, right? Always makes you create a bulleted list with that center justified title, word or two, that means nothing usually. It's noise. We don't even pay attention to it anymore. We just totally ignore it. It's a word or two. It tells us pretty much nothing. And then we pack the slide full of text. And again, the presenter is where we want the focus to be, right?
Right.
On the instructor. They're the SME. They're the true knowledge. And yet we give them a slide and it's human nature to sit there and read the slide. And that's what they're doing. And that's where their focus is. And they're not going to listen to you until they figure out what all that means.
But isn't that the way that instructors make sure they hit all It's
definitely a comfort. People find a lot of comfort in PowerPoint. It provides organization. So it absolutely has its benefits. And you can't get away from all text. And I'm not advocating for that. And I'm not saying go change all your lesson plans. That's not real. It's not realistic. But there are certain points that we want to emphasize, certain visuals that are more powerful, little changes that we can make to help our students. And yeah, I do think that it serves a purpose. It helps instructors, but it's become a crutch and it's made the presentation PowerPoint, not the instructor. It's made the instructor passive. And then so what happens when you're passive, when you're reading something out loud? I'm not actively engaged in that information. So I'm probably not going to be as effective of a presenter either.
And you're basically changing people's focus. If you're an instructor, It's not about you and how much information you're providing. It's whether or not the people receive that information. That's a paradigm shift, I'm sure, for many of the old school instructors.
Oh, for sure.
And
for sure.
How did you get them to buy in? Because let's face it, change is not easy for anyone.
Yeah. Again, little bites over time and presenting the research behind the why, and giving them real life examples and then success stories, right? So we had some early adopters, some instructors that were like, absolutely, I see the value in this. And they'd make small changes. And then we'd ask them, okay, come talk to the other instructors, present that, show what you're doing, and talk about how effective it is. For wins and losses, right? Because not everything is going to be a perfect attempt. And we've tried to support our instructors in making these changes as well. And we don't want it to be overwhelming. Like I said, we've never advocated for wholesale change. We've never said, go take out that initial lesson plan PowerPoint that's 400 slides and change every single slide. That's not realistic. We can't do that. But we can make small changes and we can develop new things with these concepts in mind.
Yeah, that's great. I think back to my own nuclear career, and when I was in nuclear power school, I was an electrician's mate, and it was all about, here's a bunch of information, spit it back out at the test. And over time, you did get the concepts, and it did help because I knew what K-effective, six-factor formula, all those things stuck in my head. But what was interesting is I remember a guy that was in the course with, and he was not doing well. And I was in the lowest electrician's mates class. I didn't do well in my entrance or whatever. And he failed. And if I remember this correctly, what he was sent out to the Mediterranean the next week after he failed out, and he was on an oiler, so one of a ship that just refueled conventional ships, as an electrician's mate, and he came up to us and he just started crying. His whole life depended on that. And I remember thinking, I don't want to fail. That's what I took from that. But I think about the structure, what you dealt with was almost similar where, and I don't know, maybe this was part of it, is if you wash out because you can't take a test or you can't handle anxiety, then how are you going to handle being on a submarine for 70 days underwater? Maybe that was part of the whole nuclear program, but it seems like it carried over to your experience in the commercial world almost.
Yeah, and there is this old school thought and argument that if they can't handle their anxiety, if they can't handle the pressure, they shouldn't be here anyway. But first of all, this is a business and we invest a lot of money and time into these people. So that's one thing. But like you started the interview with, Bill, it's about the people. We want to support our people, create the right kind of culture where they know that they're supported. And not only that, you can learn how to deal with that stuff. There is actual ways to deal with it and to handle it. And if you can be taught that and you can employ those methods, why wouldn't we want to give them that opportunity? Why wouldn't we want to? If I present my spiel to 15 operators at the beginning of the class and I help one of them through, first of all, that's a lot of money that we're saving the company, but we're changing somebody's life and it encourages a better culture and they can go on to be as effective as any other operator.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm so glad we've moved away from that method. It sounds like it's getting more popular. You mentioned Conti and all that, but do you remember like a specific kind of win that someone that was really struggling with anxiety? Now, I think what you told me in the pre-interview is you give them a little kind of primer in the beginning of the course to set the stage. But tell me how that works with someone that traditionally would have washed out and how it's changed.
Yeah, so we do. So now what we do is when a class begins, I go in and basically just provide some awareness. We have this program. It's here if you need it. I give them a little bit of information, not a ton. And then when they move into their audit exams later on towards the end, that's when we know that they're probably going to be more likely to listen to me because all of a sudden now they're starting to feel the pressure. Some of them have already felt that anxiety on other exams. And so I go back in and I do an hour-long workshop where, again, I walk them through what's happening in the brain and the parasympathetic nervous system versus the sympathetic nervous system and fight or flight and all that good stuff. And then we talk about ways that they can combat that and what they can do in that moment. if they happen to be sitting taking their exam, and maybe they've never experienced that anxiety before, I give them 2 or 3 tools. I say, if you take nothing away from this, put these in your back pocket, know that you have them if you're faced with that situation. Students that get to a certain level, maybe they've gone to an academic review board, or they're at that level. Sometimes some of the actions that'll come out in that will be they meet with me individually. And when they do, what we do is put together like a plan, because a lot of anxiety can be controlled just with a semblance of control. You feel like you can control the situation a little bit better. And also it's like a distraction, right? If I have other things to focus on, if I have this plan. And the plan can be as simple as I'm going to take a drink of water every 10 minutes, which is also so important to cognitive function. So 2 birds with 1 stone. I'm going to eat a snack every 45 minutes. I'm going to get up and walk around the building every hour. And again, that gets the blood moving. We get more resources to the brain. So there's a method behind the madness in these plans. And that's what we work on with them, so that they have that to fall back on in times of extreme stress on those exams. Now, you asked about a success story. We have a dinner for graduates, licensing. When they get their licenses, they all go to a dinner. Now, I wasn't there, but my boss was there, Mike Brazili, who's now our PI director. And he came back the next day and he said, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of us." He said, one of the students and their spouse came up to me after dinner and thanked me and thanked us for addressing that anxiety and providing that program, and actually made the claim that they believe that got them through it. That was early on when we had started the program. So that just meant a ton to us. And since then, I've met with a number of students, and I've gotten a number of emails after the fact. Thank you for your time. Thank you for giving me those tips. A lot of this stuff, they know too. It's a reminder, drink water. When I show them pictures of the brain, here's a dehydrated brain. It's smaller. Here's what happens when you're overtired. Your brain doesn't work as well. So should you be cramming the night before, or should you be getting a good night's sleep? Research shows you should be getting a good night's sleep. So we talk about those things as well, and all that can contribute. And so, we've had enough successes that we're moving fleet-wide with this, and we're excited about it for sure.
That's awesome. And it's so cool because you're basically changing your program to match the needs of the people that come into it versus the old method, which is, we should have picked better. And there's probably so many smart people that weren't able to make it through the program that really didn't have to be that way.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are people that are hearing this will have perhaps someone, or they work at a plant that's not as evolved as Beaver Valley is in Vistra. What would you say to them to get them, because I don't care what it is, there's a lot of resistance to it, especially if there's someone that maybe didn't come through the same path that you did. What would you tell them to try, and how would you get them to open up minds and hearts?
I would say reach out for help. You do some benchmarking. We are glad to share what we have and what we're doing. We absolutely want to help support the industry. So I'll get on a call with you and walk you through some of what we do. We've shared because we presented this at Conti 2 years ago. And so we did have a number of plants reach out to us after that. We shared our information, but start with some research. When I started this, and the biggest thing that you come across in the research is breathing techniques. I got to be honest with you, Bill, I thought I was a bunch of hooey. I was like, really? You're going to tell me about breathing? And then I started to really delve into the research, and it is absolutely astounding the power that breathing has over what it can do to your brain and your cognitive functioning and your whole entire body. It's so beyond powerful. And so I adopted it myself. I thought, okay, I'm periodically an anxious person. We all have these moments. I was sitting at Conti in February in the back of the room getting ready for my presentations. And you know what I was doing? I was doing my breathing techniques, because you can truly feel your parasympathetic nervous system kick in, and you feel your heart rate start to slow, and you feel the sweating will subside. You get back to that, what they call rest and digest status, where your systems start to work again. So I'd say start to look into the research, spend a little bit of time here and there, see what you think. And if you believe that there's a place for it within your organization, then reach out for help.
Yeah, you got me thinking, why don't we do a quick deep breathing exercise? How would you do it, or how did you do it at Conti?
So the easiest one, my favorite, is called box breathing. And that is you breathe in for a count of 4 or 5 or 6, whatever. Hold for 4, 5, 6. Breathe out 4, 5, 6, and hold 4, 5, 6. So I usually do a 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe out 1, 2, 3, 4, and again hold 1, 2, 3, 4. And you do that for as long as you want. They usually say 2 to 3 minutes is a good kind of place to start. I'll be honest with you, and there is research that suggests that when you first start this, you're not going to feel the benefits it's not as effective as it will be if you do it consistently in a couple months from now, because your body adjusts, but you also get better at it. And so you will see more benefit over time.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said too. You started out small, you gave folks a little background, a small presentation in the beginning of their classes. It almost sounds like you had almost like a therapeutic relationship with people. Is that part of what you were trying to do, is just develop a relationship so by the time they needed you, they could trust you?
Right.
Hey, I was in the field and getting a call to get a status would drive me crazy. It pulls you away from the work, and you can get root causes and apparent causes because you get distracted. You don't need to do that. There's real-time updates. Just contact my friends at Next Axiom, and they'll step you through how they can implement that at your company and out in the field. Companies like NextEra, Idaho Labs, they use Next Axiom and they love it. So contact my friends at nextaxiom.com.
You mean our instructors or the students?
No, when you were presenting to the students, when you said I gave
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And a big part of what I do is let them know I'm here to support you. You tell your supervisors, don't tell your supervisors. I don't have to talk to them. You can come to me, you can email me, you can call me. And then when they do come to me, that is the first thing I do is I get to know them a little bit. I don't say, sit down, let's make a plan. I say, tell me about your history with anxiety. Tell me about your background in general. A lot of times they'll tell me about things that they have going on in their lives at that time. And we'll talk through that. So yeah, there's absolutely a component of that for sure. That's really important. So that's a good point, Bill.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm sure there's people that hear this type of podcast and would say, it just seems like so much work. There's so much I have to change. Why isn't the other person getting it or whatever? How would you encourage someone to open up their mind that's maybe not been exposed to as much research or whatever you have been?
So a lot of this is affective domain stuff, right? And we talk a lot in the nuclear industry about changing behavior. How can we change behavior? How can we improve performance? And guess how you do that? You do that through affective domain. And another big piece of this is your culture, right? Your organizational culture. When you support your people, when you show that you genuinely care about your people, you're going to have happier employees, higher productivity, more ownership, and it's just overall a better organization. And so that's a good segue, Bill, into the other piece of what we've been really working on is the NeuroLeadership. That was the other topic that I presented about at Conti. And again, in nuclear, we talk quite often about how do we change our culture? How can we change our culture? And then the principles of NeuroLeadership, and it goes back to pretty much what I've been talking about, fight or flight and the limbic system and those sorts of things, and how we respond in social situations, how we respond to our leaders, how we should be treating our people. That's how you can change your culture.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about the whole concept behind it. I can't remember the man's name that you told me wrote the book.
Dr. David Rock. So Dr. David Rock started the NeuroLeadership Institute in the early 2000s. It's a fascinating field. And the guiding principle or premise is reward versus threat versus reward, right? And so they have come up with 5 domains of human social experience based in the neuroscience. So how we respond in social situations, again, based on what happens in the brain. And there's this great model, it's called the SCARF model. And it basically says that here are things that you can do. It talks about the status that they feel is the S for in SCAR, the certainty, the level of certainty that they feel in the interaction. A is for autonomy. So do they feel like they have any kind of ownership? And the R is for relatedness. So the relationship that they feel. And then F is a biggie. That's for fairness, how fair the exchange is. So the neuroscience behind this is really fascinating because we now know that we respond to a social threat pretty much the same way we respond to a physical threat. It is that powerful. Threats to our social standing, our status, our autonomy, all those different domains directly impact how we're going to communicate, how we respond. And these threats to that system, they compare it to hearing foot walking behind you at night.
Yeah.
You respond in the same way. It's like a physical threat. The body doesn't know any difference.
That's amazing. Yeah. So let me give you a scenario totally made up. So let's say there's a shift manager that's watching an evolution happen, a cool down in the plant, and people are not paying attention to the right things. So the reactor operator, control room supervisor are doing their things, and they lock up basically. And the shift manager has to take over. And he tells them what to do, and the plant is not overly cooled and things work out okay. How would you apply those principles to find out? So you say you could write it up and say the control room supervisor didn't do his job or whatever, and the shift manager was out of role. It might say in old school parlance. How would you look at that through a SCARF model to try to understand what was really going on with that team, that they did not respond in the way that was required for the situation?
Oh, that's a challenging one, Bill. My goodness.
Yeah, I put you on the spot. I apologize.
Yeah, you really are putting me on the spot there. Let me talk to you about what each domain means a little bit, and then we can come back to the scenario. So with the SCARF model, so the first one is status, right? So you automatically, when you're in a social interaction, you figure out instantaneously, and this stuff happens within like a fifth of a second or something like that, what your relationship, what your status is in that interaction. Okay. So a shift manager talking to one of his people, there's a status right away, right? It's hierarchical, right? Communicate differently with somebody based on that status. So that's a really big one. Now, there's things that we can do as leaders to help level the playing field, right? Effective communications, showing that we care. There's lots of different things we can do. And the SCARF model talks about a lot, that sort of stuff for every domain. The second one is certainty. And so this is like, how is there predictability? Do I know what's going to happen? Are expectations the same or consistent, I should say? So, how certain am I about what's going to happen in that scenario? So again, we can create those sorts of situations for our people. Autonomy is the third. And again, so this is, do I have any kind of control over the situation that I'm in at all? So micromanagement's a big one here. If you're micromanaging someone, they feel like they don't have any of that. And that, again, will impact how they act. It'll change their behavior. And small changes, giving people small bits of autonomy can make a huge difference, giving them choices and things like that. So the R then is relatedness. How comfortable am I in this social interaction? When you don't know somebody, right away, you get a threat response as soon as you meet. And so right away, the brain's going to use different pathways. It's going to communicate in a different way than it would with somebody that they know. Okay, so that's why we do icebreakers. That's why we do team building. There's actually reasons why that stuff is so effective. And that's why teams that know each other well, that have worked together a long time, that get along, they're better at problem solving. They're more creative. There's a plethora of benefits when people have that sense of relatedness. And then F is a really big one. That's fairness. So if I think that you're going to treat him differently or have treated him differently, or management isn't held to the same standards or whatever the case may be, and even if it's just a perception of that it's not a fair exchange, again, my brain's going to respond differently and it's not going to be as effective a situation. to go back to your scenario, I think a huge part of it is how you prime your culture, how you prime your team, what your team is going into those sorts of scenarios is going to impact how they respond. And then another big piece of that is when they come out of it, how you deal with the feedback, how you deal with the critiquing. We love to right away in nuclear, give them a list of 75 things that they did wrong. And first of all, that's overwhelming. And second of all, we kind of shut down. There's not a lot of behavioral change that comes through that kind of feedback. Research shows it doesn't really change people's behavior. Now, there's a lot of different ways. First of all, it's a cultural thing. How do you have a culture where leadership is looking for feedback? Do your feedback goes? That's a big one. But also, one of my favorite things to do is I'll observe an instructor, and after the fact, I'll say, "Tell me how that went. How did it feel for you? What would you change? What do you think went well?" So you're focusing on positives and improvement opportunities. And then, you're establishing some relatedness there, right? So a couple things are going on. You're leveling the playing field a little bit with that status.
Yes.
Okay? And they're going to be more open to that feedback and probably more likely to actually make some change. So feedback's another big piece of that. So it's really about culture. They're going to happen, right? But how we deal with those mistakes, how we internalize them, and then we'll probably be less likely to even encounter them when we have those effective leadership, those effective skills in place and that kind of culture in place.
Yeah, it's fascinating to look at the world through those eyes, because it's easy to make things like character flaws that aren't really character flaws. And I feel bad looking back on my career, the people that were pushed aside or not recognized for their skills because one bad thing would happen. They got in the wrong component years ago or whatever. And it was a tough culture for a number of years. It sounds like people understand that so much better now, and it can change outcomes in lives like you talked about. And I talked to Lori Brady from the NEI, who I think you probably know, but she talked about developing the workforce of the future. We can't just filter people out and put them aside. We need folks, and we need diverse thought processes. And I think what you're describing is somebody that was able to come from the outside of the industry, see what things you could change, and then work your way into the actual machinery of how we educate people. It's so interesting to hear your approach. I hope what you describe is basically maturing the way we approach people.
Yeah, it is. And we're seeing that change. This is something, the NeuroLeadership is fairly new for us. I'd say maybe the past 2 years we've been implementing. It is part of our new supervisor program now. So we do present it there. That it's going to be Vistra-wide. And we've presented it at our leadership alignment meetings to our senior leadership team. And that's the other important piece of all of this, right? You have to have buy-in from your management and your leadership team. They have to support these efforts. Yes. Otherwise, it's an exercise in futility.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree. And I think about the times in leadership when I was surprised. It's normally because, one, I wasn't listening, didn't understand whatever the situation was from someone else's perspective. And what I think some of my bosses over the years would try to find an easy way for them to deal with it. They would make it a one-liner somehow, let's move on. And I think over time, those little decisions have big impact on the culture in a negative way. And I want this industry to be performing at its top because we understand going in that these are difficult things. And I feel bad. Even the technology, what are we giving people? And we didn't even talk about this, but what kind of technology are you providing people like in procedures, handwritten procedures? Why on earth would we do that? And you go home and fill out your taxes on TurboTax, and it doesn't allow you to put any random numbers in, but it's just to support people in that approach. Once you start doing that, it can totally change cultures and outcomes for folks. So I really think what you're describing can really help any industry, plus help our existing plants.
For sure.
Yeah. Any last things? One thing I haven't talked about, I'm curious about. Why are you as passionate about what you do as you are? Did you grow up in scenarios that perhaps you weren't heard, or how did you end up getting involved in this type of work?
You know what? I've always been passionate about education and helping people, always. And I've always been fascinated with how the brain works and why we do what we do. It's been a natural progression for me to look into these things. And I'm still baffled I ended up in nuclear power. But so once I was in nuclear power, though, it seemed logical to me to pull that sort of stuff in because I wanted to affect change, right? I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to help our plants, the company, but the instructors, we have amazing instructors and they want to be the best. That's what's one really neat thing about nuclear power. It's rare to find somebody that isn't striving to be the best. There's a lot of that type of personality. And so I wanted to help support that and help foster those sorts of skills where I could.
Yeah.
And once I started to see little changes and see the culture shift a little bit and the excitement in some of our people with some of this stuff, it's just snowballed.
That's great. That's so I want to throw this out there. So if you're listening to this podcast, maybe you're not in nuclear energy, but you have a passion about teaching and learning or any of those type of things, what would you tell people about that initial fear of, I don't want to have to walk into a control room or do all that stuff? What would you tell folks that for them to consider a career in nuclear power?
Sometimes you just have to step out of your comfort zone, right? Be confident in what you do know, do your research, prepare yourself, and ask for help. I used to write our outage newsletter, and my technical knowledge, now it's a little bit better, but I knew nothing about how these plants worked at all. But I found out who to reach out to and who to ask for help. And there were so many people willing to assist me. And they love to teach this stuff. So they would teach me these things. And so now I know a lot of the acronyms. Now I can explain some of the systems a little bit. So just keep at it. You're going to fall down a little bit here and there. Absolutely. I've gone home not feeling too great at times. But overall, it's an amazing industry. It's fascinating. There's some great people and there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And I appreciate all your time, Annaliese. I should say Dr. Annaliese, but I forgot to mention
okay.
that. Yeah, no, I love what you shared and all the success in the future. And I know what you are doing. You're basically leading an industry that really it's time to hear these type of techniques and views that get people to think differently. And I really appreciate what you've done for the industry.
Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, it's not going away, right?
Right.
So we need to embrace it and make this industry even better.
I agree. Take care. And it was a pleasure. And it was a pleasure getting to know you over the last few weeks we've gotten to speak.
Same to you, Bill. I really appreciate your time as well.
Yeah, I hope you really enjoyed this episode of Nuclear Leader Podcast. I hope you tell a few friends about the show, get the word out. It really helps because the people are the essence of what is going to keep these nuclear plants safe, ability to expand and put in SMRs and all the things that we talk about and President Trump is purporting and trying to push for. It all depends on people, good designs, good operation, good training. And I think Annaliese really has a great recipe to get those things done. And remember, Joe Ford talked about those same things. He was passionate. Annaliese is passionate about making sure those folks understand why they react in a certain way, how you can support them as they struggle with test anxiety or whatever it is. So think about that when you go back and you do your leadership at nuclear plants. And again, thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure for me to interview folks like Annaliese and get the word out about this podcast. So this is Bill Nowicki saying thanks for listening and stay tuned for our next episode of the Nuclear Leader Podcast. That's it for this episode of the Nuclear Leader. Thanks for joining me as we shine a light on the people powering nuclear safety and success. If you're inspired to lead better, subscribe, share, and drop us a review. Until next time, stay sharp and keep leading the way.